Hey all, we are in the first of a four-part series focusing on MECC. MECC is a management philosophy that has been pioneered at GitLab. MECC stands for managing so everyone can contribute. And the goal of MECC is to speed up company progress by creating the environment for better decisions and improved execution of them. So this call is the first of four, and it's going to focus on the first tenet of MECC, which is informed decisions. And so the purpose of this call is for Sid to dive into that page and articulate examples that he has seen substantiate or reinforce informed decisions. And we're going to use those articulations to add to the existing page and iterate on it with either deeper examples of ones that are already listed or net new examples. And we'll share the handbook pages that we're looking at in the recording notes as well.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Thanks for all the work that's going into this. Screen share the informed decisions page. I think this transparency example is great. I do think it's more of a handbook example than transparency. So transparency is being public by default. That's the core of transparency. A handbook doesn't need to be public. All of these things you could do in an organization that never shares anything with the outside world. So I think we stumbled that informed decisions benefit from a handbook. But I don't think it's an example of transparency.
So would you say that having a handbook as an example of informed decisions?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't think having a handbook, every company, I've never met a company without a handbook. I've also never met a company that actually uses it for more than 80% of their things until GitLab. So I think handbook first is maybe a better way to phrase it.
Would transparency still have validity in staying in this portion, but with a different example?
Of course, yeah, very much.
Is there an example that comes to mind?
Public by default. I think it's stuff that paid off in unexpected ways. Like we live stream a ton of meetings. I once live streamed, like Michael McBride was onboarding and he's like, hey, can you pitch the product to me? I'm like, sure. Or was the other way around? He's pitching the product to me. I don't know. But we live streamed it and it was like, oh, it's super hard because it's my first day, but it's one of the most popular videos that we have. And it actually went viral. Like his neighbor saw it as a suggestion below his Gmails, which is like, how does Google know that? But whatever. But it's that if you make something public, there's all kinds of unexpected uses for it. I think for GitLab, that's been like, we were public to stay in touch with the wider community. That succeeded. Then it became part of our talent brand. And now it's becoming part of our customer brand. It's helping out the general awareness around the company and the product.
Great context on that. Given that this framework does shed light on kind of the anti or the opposite, could you dig in a bit more on what happens if you aren't public by default? That would be more aligned with maybe a conventional management philosophy or on a need to know basis.
Yeah. You get information silos, like people in a company don't know what the strategy is, so they don't know how to make decisions. People outside the company doesn't know what the company stands for. People inside the company are sometimes shielded from the information. They need to know it, but like, how do you have to make a case. And in order to make a case, you first need to know the information existed. Like it's public by default makes that a lot easier.
When you say public by default, if there's an organization that's not comfortable with making their handbook public, could public by default still apply within the company? So they're public within the walls of the company, or does it have to be public extending
I
beyond?
think we would call it internal by default, but I think it would still be a benefit to kind of be visible to all team members by default.
Okay. Good stuff.
Yeah, so let's change this heading to public by default. Let's add a handbook first heading, and let's find a cool. Single source of truth. Yep. I don't know. Single source of truth. We have a doc for agendas. Really? I don't think that's a compelling. I don't think that's a compelling example.
What would be a better example there?
Think about where we struggle most with single sources of truth. Where we struggle most is a list of all applications used in the company. Because security keeps a list, IT keeps a list, people ops keeps a list, everyone keeps a list, but they're different lists that list different things. Getting all of them to kind of work from the same list, it's been amazingly hard. I think of a smaller example. It was in the CEO channel kind of a week or two ago. It was about time zone selection. I don't think that's an appealing example. I think that the list of applications, like the natural state of an organization is that every department keeps their own list of which applications are in use. Purchasing, keeping their own list as well.
What's the solve for that? Would it have to be the chief executive saying that, like my interpretation of that is each function wants their own list, maybe because they don't trust the integrity of a list that's maintained by another function?
Well, it's hard. Like anyone who can change stuff, like especially if it's a sheet, like in a sheet, someone like sorts and they press the wrong button and now everything is, they selected a comment and then a column and then sorted. Now the whole list is messed up. Like it's hard to like trust every single person to never make that mistake or detect it quickly. So I think what you need is a shared space, but with version control. You need to be able to see who did what when, and you gotta have something that doesn't allow for like an easy mistake. Maybe that's the wrong way to say it, but the version control is essential. The other thing is, people keep saying, another thing was like, we organize by the department, which makes sense. And then people say, well, IT is going to keep the list, or purchasing going to keep the list, or people going to keep the list. That's not how it works. If you organize by department, there's multiple departments involved with any application. Still, that application should have a single source of truth. Where should that live? It's not about who purchases it or who secures it. It's about what the application does, the output. What does the application help with? If it's Workday, it should be in the people part of the handbook. If it's NetSuite, it should be in the finance part of the handbook. If it's GitLab, it should be in the engineering part of the handbook and the security part. But like, that's where it should be. And then like, wow, but I want this list and it should have all these applications. I want to see them in one neat list. Great. Well, we got to write some automation to do that. Say to detect, hey, this is an application. And on that application page, you should see like, okay, well, this one was reviewed by the security department. This is one legal signed off on, this one, etc. So that's the hard part about it.
Is there a DRI for curating single sources of truth that are cross-functional in nature as the one you just described?
Not really. Like the ideal state is that peers detect like, hey, I'm keeping a list, you're keeping a list, but we all need a comprehensive list of all applications that I use. My list is missing some of yours and vice versa. We should solve this. It's the ideal state. If functions can do it, then it goes to the CEO level, the chief of staff level.
Right. So what I heard is that if single source of truth is embedded as a principle, it's almost like self-healing, where
So
multiple teams.
Yeah. You search and you find that other team's list and you're like, hey, you search for NetSuite and you find like, oh, there's another one. You reach out, like you look at the author and you reach out like, hey, we're both keeping a list of attributes about NetSuite. Let's do that together.
So the difference I see here is that instead of multiple teams detecting that they are looking at, or they're both maintaining separate lists, and then they just agree to keep doing it, they would default to collaborating and trying to remove the duplication and work together.
Exactly. When you detect a duplicate source of truth, you reach out and you try to resolve that.
Okay.
And if you can't resolve it, you escalate. Like hey, we can't agree whether purchasing or legal or security or the people department should maintain this list.
Yeah, but the key there is from a management philosophy perspective, agreeing that that's a problem instead of just agreeing that teams can just continue to manage their own list and we just turn a blind eye to the duplicative nature of the list.
Exactly. And by the way, the list not being handbook first, which was another thing.
Right.
Well, although there were some handbook lists, but yeah, it stashed in that department's
right. Okay.
part of the handbook.
Do you want to share again and go to the next one?
Yeah, let me. So low context communication, company-wide message. What changed? Merge request, DRI, AMA. Okay. Makes sense. Situational leadership. In an organization powered by MECC, manage more open-minded.
Could you share, let's just set the stage on this one, situational leadership. What's your interpretation of that? How would you define that? This is one that feels a bit.
I think you vary your style based on the situation. And the style is like super directive. The style can go, if you look at a spectrum, you can say, hey, Darren, on this page, insert, remove the double space. That's super direct and do it now. That's super directive. Or you could say, hey, Darren, can you have another look at, I think that page doesn't look nicely formatted. If you agree, consider spending some time on that at some point in the future. So you can vary the styles. And I think people sometimes assume that like, because you're directive in one situation, that you're directive in all situations. Some people are, but you won't be very successful, right? If you do that. So things that, and there's an idealized version. I don't actually function like this, but an idealized, stylized version, you consider all kinds of factors when making that decision on how directive to be. And this is what I could come up with from the top of my head.
Is there an example in your own leadership that comes to mind where you are maybe proud of yourself for pausing and considering leading in a situational manner? Or conversely, if there was an example where maybe that wasn't the case, the situation wasn't considered, I think both of those could be useful as we flesh this out.
Yeah, lots of them. There was, we canceled a company get together and we were working on, okay, what now? And I had a pretty detailed proposal, and I left it before my holiday. I said, look, figure this out. But when I get back, I want something we can service to the entire company in a day or two. And when I got back, there was a completely different proposal. And there were all kinds of problems identified with my original proposal. So the change proposal was a lot better. That's great. Like, I could have also pressed for like, hey, you publish this to the company now, and I'll deal with the fallout when I get back or something like that. That would have been a mistake. So that'd be an example. And there's also, like, I had a conversation today with a team member, and it was like, well, at that point you were pretty, not their words, but pretty stern about like, hey, this is unacceptable. And it was. We were going to send out a communication to millions of people that I thought could have a material adverse effect to the company. I said, look, this is unacceptable. This cannot go out. I need to improve every single message that goes out from here on. That's like, on the delegation scale, that is like very little delegation. It's very little responsibility. But when the stakes are very high and the risks are very high, like it's a lot of people, it's an important message, and so far the messaging hasn't been great. Like, well, then it calls for the most risk reduction that's possible, even though that's not fun and it's not efficient for anybody either.
And my take on the MECC lens on that is the proper application of this is having a scenario like that, but then having the situational awareness that if you went into another meeting where the stakes were much different, the potential audience was much different, not getting fixated on
exactly
being
like,
willing
it would be
to
the same as saying to you, Darren, look, anything you write about MECC, run it by me before you even put it in a merge request. Like, you'd slam the door and walk out, because like, what is that? Doesn't make sense. It's very inefficient. It's very demotivating. It's very not empowering. And in the end, like, we can course correct where we're off. And what bothers me a bit about the example today, I think, when kicking off a new project, a manager's open-minded. Well, first of all, open-minded, I think, is a strange word to use. But when kicking off a new project, depends on the project. Sometimes a project is like, I know what's needed. I know my reports. I know this and this person is going to go on it. I'm not going to ask for intra-company volunteers. No, this calls for the expertise of this and this person. I know there's nobody else there. Like, the whole idea of situational leadership is it depends. When we identified a small thing today, the YouTube unfiltered icon was wrong. Are we going to say exactly to this person, fix it? No. We asked like, hey, CEO Shadow, can you drop it in the CEO channel? And we'll see whoever wants to fix that. It's low stakes. We don't know who should solve it. Fine. Let's delegate in a way that we don't even know who we're delegating it to. And there's a big odds that it doesn't get solved. It's fine. If we see it again 2 weeks from now, we'll mention it again.
Greatly appreciate the added context on that. That helped clarify some understanding for me, and I'll be happy to revise that example. We have 2 minutes left in the scheduled block. Do you want to touch on the last example here? Otherwise,
sure.
we can. Okay, go for it.
Diverse area of perspectives, makes sense. Async, yep. I think it's good. I think when we call things example, we should give an example. Like, why doesn't this link to the MR? Give a proper example. I think that goes for all the examples. There's
Right.
they're faux examples because they don't discuss a specific situation.
Right. They need to be more specific and less broad.
Yeah. I don't think the content that's in there is is all bad. Some of it can just be moved up above the example part.
Right on.
Cool.
Awesome. Thanks for this, Sid. Looking forward to making some updates on this page and joining you again soon for fast decisions. Thanks for doing this in public as well.
You too. And I'm super excited. I think these pages are already really good. Let's